My name is Amelia Brooks, and for most of my 20s, I believed loyalty was love. I believed that if you gave enough of yourself, family would eventually see you not as useful, not as convenient, but as human. I was wrong. I was 26 when I finally understood that betrayal doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears your mother's voice. Sometimes it signs your name at the bottom of a document you never agreed to. I grew up in a small, ordinary house that always felt heavier than it looked. My father liked to call it the Brooks home. My mother called it what we worked so hard for. My older brother, Ethan, called it temporary. I called it mine. Not because my name was on the deed, it wasn't, but because I paid for most of it. When my father's back gave out, I was 19 and working nights at a pharmacy while attending community college during the day. When my mother retired early because of stress, I took a second job. When Ethan dropped out of business school for the third time, my parents looked at me and said, "You understand responsibility?" And I did. I understood it so well that I let it swallow me. Every month, my paycheck disappeared into the same black hole. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, medical bills, temporary loans. "We'll pay you back." They never said thank you. Gratitude implies choice. I was never given one. What I was given instead was guilt. "You're the strong one, Amelia. You don't have kids yet. You're not married. You can handle it." Those sentences became the walls of my life. The first crack appeared the night I overheard my mother on the phone. I was standing at the top of the stairs, holding a laundry basket, when she said my name not warmly, not casually, but like a calculation. "She doesn't need to know yet," Mom whispered. She panicked. There was a pause. Then she laughed softly. "No, it's fine. She trusts us. Trusts us." I waited for my name to come again. It didn't. She switched topics to Ethan's future, to what he deserves, to sacrifices parents make. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wall, feeling something unfamiliar crawl up my spine. Fear doesn't always feel like terror. Sometimes it feels like clarity arriving too early. I started paying attention after that. I noticed how mail addressed to me disappeared before I saw it. How my father suddenly insisted on handling finances I had managed for years. How Ethan spoke about when the house is finally sorted as if it were already his. Once, during dinner, Ethan raised his glass and said, smiling, "Here's to family, everyone playing their part." Everyone laughed. I didn't, because for the first time I wondered if my part was already written. The truth revealed itself slowly, like rot behind a painted wall. I found the folder by accident while looking for my birth certificate. It was tucked behind old insurance papers, thick with documents that weren't meant for me. My name was on them, so was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. My hands shook as I read words I had never agreed to: power of attorney, loan guarantor, financial responsibility. They had used my credit, my income, my identity. The realization hit me in layers. First disbelief, then nausea. Then rage so quiet it scared me. I confronted my mother first. She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed like I was the problem. "We did what we had to," she said, folding laundry calmly. "You would have said no." That sentence changed something inside me forever. Not "we were wrong," not "we're sorry." Just, "you would have refused to be used." I asked my father if he knew. He didn't look at me when he answered. "Ethan needed a future," he said. "You're resilient." Resilient. Another word for expendable? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, replaying every moment I had ignored, every time I paid without asking, every time I shrank myself so others could stand taller. I realized something then, something painful and freeing. They never saw me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource. The final betrayal came 2 weeks later. A letter arrived in my name. This time, they missed it. Foreclosure notice, but not for their debt, for mine. They had transferred liability, shifted risk, protected Ethan, and when everything collapsed as it was designed to, I would be the one standing alone in the wreckage. That was the moment I stopped crying. That was the moment something cold and steady took its place. Because if they thought I was going to quietly disappear, they had underestimated the girl who built their entire life. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and smiled for the first time in weeks. They thought I didn't know. They were wrong. And soon everything would change. People think confrontation is the hardest part. It isn't. The hardest part is pretending you don't know, smiling at the people who betrayed you while quietly learning how deep the knife went. I became an actress in my own home. I laughed at dinner. I paid the bills they slid toward me. I listened as my mother complained about stress I was funding, as my father spoke about loyalty like a moral virtue, as Ethan planned a future he had never earned. They watched me closely after the foreclosure notice. Not because they cared, but because they were afraid. Fear has a smell. Once you recognize it, you never forget it. I started documenting everything. Every payment I had made. Every email that referenced temporary help. Every text where my parents admitted relying on me. Every form that carried my forged signature. I did it quietly, methodically, the way you clean a wound before surgery. At night, when the house was asleep, I scanned documents and sent them to a private cloud. I recorded conversations on my phone and named the files by date. I opened a new bank account they didn't know about and rerouted what little money I could. Not because I was planning revenge. Because I was planning freedom. They didn't make it easy. My mother sensed a shift first. "You've been distant," she said one morning, watching me over her coffee. "Is something wrong?" I shrugged. "Just tired." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You know," she continued casually, "families fall apart when people start keeping secrets." The irony burned my throat. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. "You're right," I said. "Secrets destroy families." Her hand tightened around the mug. Ethan, on the other hand, grew careless. He talked too much when he felt secure. One night, after a few drinks, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Once everything's in my name, things will finally be fair." I looked up. "Fair?" He waved a hand. "You know what I mean? You're good at surviving. I'm good at building." I stared at him, the boy my parents protected at my expense, and understood something terrifying. They didn't just betray me, they believed they were right. The pressure escalated fast. My father started bringing up legal terms at dinner casually, like trivia. My mother began crying more often, reminding me of everything they'd done for me. Ethan stopped pretending to respect me at all. Then came the suggestion. "You should move out," my mother said softly one evening. "Start your own life." It sounded generous. It wasn't. If I left, I'd lose access to records. Lose leverage. Lose proof. They weren't discarding me out of kindness. They were cleaning up. That night I met with a lawyer. Her name was Rachel, and she didn't flinch once as I laid everything out. "This is financial abuse," she said plainly. "An identity fraud." The words landed heavier than I expected. Not family conflict. Not misunderstanding. Abuse. "They thought you'd stay silent," Rachel continued. "Because people like them always assume the strong one won't fight back." I asked her what would happen if I exposed everything. She looked me straight in the eye. "They'll deny it, cry, turn it around on you. And when that fails," she paused, "they'll panic." The breaking point came sooner than I expected. A man in a suit knocked on the door one afternoon. I was the only one home. He asked for Amelia Brooks. My hands were steady as I confirmed my identity. He handed me a packet. Court papers. My parents had filed a motion claiming I had taken loans without their knowledge, that I had mismanaged funds, that I was unstable. They weren't just protecting themselves. They were destroying me. When my family came home, I was sitting at the table with the papers neatly stacked. My mother's face went white. My father went silent. Ethan looked relieved. "She's lying," he said immediately. "I told you she'd crack." That was the moment I felt it. The final separation. Whatever love I'd been holding on to died right there. "I didn't take anything," I said calmly. "But I know who did." They all spoke at once. Accusations, gaslighting, tears. I stood up. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." Silence fell like a blade. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing. My father stared at the floor. Ethan stood frozen. "You wouldn't," my father said quietly. "You wouldn't do this to us." I met his eyes. "You already did this to me." I moved out that night. Not in anger, not in chaos, with precision. I took my documents, my clothes, my dignity, and left them with the lies they had built. As I drove away, I didn't feel relief. I felt resolve, because now they knew I wasn't ignorant anymore. And fear had finally chosen its side. The thing about truth is that it doesn't rush, it waits. It lets people build lies tall enough that, when they fall, there's no mistaking the sound. I didn't speak to my family after I moved out. No calls, no messages, no explanations. Not because I was afraid, but because silence was the last thing they expected from me. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd come back. They thought I'd break. Instead, I prepared. The court date arrived on a gray morning that smelled like rain and old paper. I wore a plain navy dress and my mother's old coat, the one she'd once told me made me look respectable. It felt fitting. They arrived together. My mother clutched tissues like a shield. My father looked 10 years older. Ethan walked in confidently, as if this were a formality, something that would end the way everything always had. In their favor, they didn't look at me. They didn't need to. They believed the story they'd written would protect them. When it was their turn to speak, they painted me as unstable, overwhelmed, irresponsible. She was always emotional, my mother said, voice trembling perfectly. She insisted on helping, my father added. We tried to stop her. I listened without expression. I had cried enough for a lifetime already. Then Rachel stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply laid the truth on the table. Bank statements, emails, audio recordings, time-stamped documents. Proof doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. As the evidence unfolded, I watched something incredible happen. My parents didn't look angry anymore. They looked small. The judge asked my mother if she recognized the forged signature. She hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any confession. Ethan panicked first. He stood up suddenly, arguing, interrupting, insisting it was a misunderstanding, that I had agreed. That I had always been happy to help. The judge stopped him with a raised hand. Sit down. That single sentence broke something in him. For the first time in his life, authority didn't belong to him, or my parents. It belonged to truth. When the ruling came, it felt almost unreal. The debts were reassigned. The fraud was acknowledged. Protective orders were issued. They didn't lose everything. They lost control, and that was worse. Outside the courthouse, my mother finally approached me. She reached for my hand. I stepped back. Amelia, she said, tears spilling now without elegance. We're still family. I looked at her, the woman who taught me to be quiet, to be useful, to disappear. No, I said gently. We were a transaction. I just stopped paying. My father opened his mouth to speak. I didn't wait. Some conversations end without closure, and that's still an ending. The house was sold months later. Not to Ethan, not to my parents. To pay what they owed. I heard Ethan move back in with them temporarily. I heard my mother stop telling people about her ungrateful daughter. I heard my father avoided my name entirely. None of it mattered because something else had happened. I had started sleeping through the night. I moved into a small apartment with uneven floors and too much light. I bought furniture slowly, deliberately only what I needed. I opened my mail without fear. I laughed without scanning the room for reactions. For the first time in my life, I existed without permission. Sometimes I still grieved. Not for them, but for the girl I used to be. The one who believed love meant endurance. The one who mistook sacrifice for worth. If I could speak to her now, I'd say this: you were never weak. They just needed you to believe you were. People ask me if I forgive my family. I don't answer right away. Forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's a private choice. What I do know is this: I no longer carry their shame. I no longer finance their comfort. I no longer confuse pain with loyalty. And that quietly, irrevocably is justice. I am Amelia Brooks. I was used. I was discarded, but I was never disposable. And neither are you. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. Subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories about betrayal, resilience, and justice. Sometimes, hearing someone else survive is how we remember we can too.